Let's move to the next part of the conference where we have got another very thought-provoking and very interesting panel conversation that's going to take place, where we are going to talk about the future of manufacturing in the global economy. And to be part of this panel, may I request Mr. Roy, Director of the National Bureau of Asian Research, to please be on the stage. Mr. Roy. May I request Mr. Himanshu Jain, MD and Vice President, Indian Subcontinent and Southeast Asia, Sealed Air, to please come on the stage, please.
Today should be Make in India Day, I think. We've been talking about Make in India and related topics all day here, while our Prime Minister has been talking about Make in India to Fortune 500 CEOs up there in New York. So everyone's talking about Make in India. And I guess they're talking about it because it's important. India has a vision of generating over 100 million jobs between now and 2022 by attracting manufacturing and increasing the manufacturing as a percentage of GDP from 16% today to 25% of a larger GDP in 2022. A lot has to be done to make India successful in manufacturing, and we've heard some of that today around whether it's land, labor, ease of doing business, and hopefully India will move forward on all those fronts. In addition to what we do, a lot of our success in the Make in India program would also depend on how we react to some big shifts happening in global manufacturing. There are some mega trends. I mean, these are buzzwords, things like Internet of Things, or as a recent issue of Harvard Business Review said, the Internet of Everything, which is about smart, connected devices. You have trends like robotics, adaptive manufacturing or 3D printing, and many other big shifts. So to help us understand some of these trends and shifts here, I have a fantastic panel here who's going to help us understand what these trends are and what they mean for manufacturing globally and manufacturing for India. And therefore, how should our policy makers react to, or be proactive rather, about addressing and setting us up for success in the face of these trends. So without much ado, I'm going to move to our panel, and I'll kick off by asking any of the panelists to start saying, what is the one big trend you're seeing globally? What does it mean for manufacturers globally? And specifically for India, what does it mean? So who'd like to kick off? Himanshu?
My take on one big trend which I observe across industry is largely driven by the volatility in the economy, and that's about flexible manufacturing. Your ability to predict demand for a long time has reduced a lot, and with so many choices available, the consumer preferences keep changing. So depending upon the environment, a flexibility in manufacturing and ability to shift from one to the other product is something which is becoming a key competitive advantage. So I'll leave that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to basically make a comment with relevance to the world and then slowly coming into India, and that's on Internet of Things. Because there, once corporates, governments, public utility services, so on and so forth, they adopted a life on manufacturing, or the entire ecosystem of manufacturing will go a massive and a substantial change. I already know of one oil platform where 30,000 sensors have been connected by Internet of Things. I mean, you know, under the heading of Internet of Things.
Anil, for those of us who don't come from a manufacturing background, what does Internet of Things mean?
It's basically like, automation. Mm-hmm. I mean, like the sensors will tell you, say in a factory, if you have the IoT set up there, absolutely all right, right? I mean, the entire system will tell you this machine is functioning malpractice in this particular part, which your human eye has not yet detected. So they will do advanced prediction. They will make your entire preventive maintenance, schedules, budgets, so on and so forth. As a result of which I feel that the uptime will increase by 50%. And these, sudden breakdowns which we have in machines, and which no industries like, I'm sure, nobody would like their machines to be down under. So I think that's a great thing to the manufacturing sector, and especially to the shop floor management.
Okay. Any others?
I think two of the trends that have been mentioned is the Internet of Things and flexi manufacturing, which both are very relevant. Increasingly, if you look at manufacturing as it is evolving and as it evolves over the next few years, you need agility, you need flexible responses to situations. And also, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel in terms of what has already been done by countries, let's say, in Southeast Asia or China, because I do not think that that model is necessarily going to work for India, because that was a low-cost manufacturing base, and that is not the way we should be going. We should be adding value to high-end systems. So, and in that sense, if we look at robotics, what we need to do is an interesting combination of a human as well as a robotic interface, where we are able to get higher margins, and we are also able to then, use a skimming strategy to make more money. Because ultimately, if you are talking about making in India, we are also talking about an economically and financially viable proposition. We are not doing it just for the sake of saying it or doing it, and therefore it has to be financially viable. And therefore, an intelligent combination of human systems, flexible manufacturing, and also sensors, as Sunil mentioned, would be able. So we need to find a niche, a space, and we need to be the best at that. We should not be doing too many things. We should do one or two or three things. That's it.
Sure, thank you.
I see two trends which are probably going to accelerate and increase in their impact going forward. The first is industry after industry, as we have known industries in the past, are going to start to face tremendous amounts of skill shortages. This skilled workforce pool is shrinking, and it's shrinking because there are far too many more industries which are starting to take shape and grow and thrive. The second part is that a large part of industry's focus over the last few decades has been on growing size and scale, and probably there is going to be a reversal, and we are likely to see miniaturization of industry capabilities in order to respond to the very market forces of flexibility and localization. Whether that miniaturization is going to happen within localities or within societies, within precincts, is something that will shape over the next few years. But these two skills are, these two trends are going to become more and more in focus across countries.
Thank you. Roy, anything
Vinay,
you'd like
I would
to
add, in answer to the question, less a what than a where, or to ask where this might take place. We've seen that in the last week, the Chinese president is visiting the U.S., and one of his chief messages is to reassure American business that the business climate in China is not fundamentally turning for the worse. But that's a hard message to sell given the trends that his leadership has brought about. And we know about the downturn in the Chinese stock market. We know about how local debt is multiples of revenue, suggesting that there are real challenges ahead for the Chinese market. And this is on top of the increased labor costs that are a well-known fact already, suggesting that there are other places in which important and advanced manufacturing might take place other than China going forward.
I guess that's good news for some of us here in markets like India. Clearly these are some important trends. We talked about smart manufacturing, some could also say over smart manufacturing if you think of Volkswagen last week. But these are some dramatic trends. Later on this evening, we'll listen to Michael Porter talk about his view on the impact of Internet of Things on strategy of companies. It's changing whole industries. And one of the examples he talks about in the Harvard Business Review article he wrote was on Ralph Lauren. Typically, you think of Ralph Lauren's competitors as other manufacturers of high-end clothing and casual wear. But in 2015, they launched a smart T-shirt. I don't know if any of you are runners here, but that T-shirt actually measures distance, calories, heartbeat, many of the things that earlier were measured by the likes of Fitbit or the new Apple Watch. So suddenly you have Ralph Lauren competing with Fitbit. What industry are they in? So these Internet of Things and smart connected devices just breaking down barriers of industry definition itself. So let's just change gears here and move to what some of this means for India. So Anil, I just want to move to the labor side of it. You know, we were hoping that, or India is still hoping, I guess, that this Make in India campaign creates 100 million jobs over the next 5 years. On the other hand, we're talking about trends of robotics, where robots and intelligent robots are not just doing heavy manual work like in the 1800s or, in the 19th century or, routine repetitive tasks like computers started doing in the 20th century, but they're actually doing things that require judgment and decision making, and therefore replacing labor and shop floor managers. So how does that reconcile with the labor or the job generation that we are expecting the Make in India campaign to create? Is that fantasy or is it real?
No, I don't think it's a fantasy because, with this labor, now you take computer for instance. In the 60s or the 70s, even in India, when we wanted to introduce computers, immediately we used to have this problem from the staff that the management wants to automate and dismiss employees. But what happened? Nothing happened, because without computer we wouldn't be where we are today. So basically I think, okay, it might, because see, now talking of say robotics, now it's too early to talk about robotics in India, because every technology has to go into a country considering the socio-economic environment of that country. Now we know in India there is huge unemployment, there's a huge number below the poverty line. The MSME sector, which form the backbone of say the German economy or the Japanese economy, is absolutely in shambles. I mean, if you see a body of a dog, the tail is only the Reliances and the Tatas and the builders, but the main body are the MSMEs. So coming back to adoption of technology will create more jobs. There might be a drop in a job, sort of maybe temporarily. I mean, it's just my hunch feeling, because technology with it brings a supply chain. Because to get that finished product, you need supplies.
Fair point. Chetan, you are at Tata Motors in a sense, in an industry where robotics has taken over in a big way. So as the CHRO there, how are you dealing with the impact of robotics on labor, skills, jobs? What's your experience there?
Tata Power.
Tata Power, sorry.
Not with Tata Motors,
Yeah.
but both Tata Power and Tata Motors are reasonably highly automated organizations now. And I just want to throw a perspective into this. Manufacturing does not constitute the entirety of any business organization. Manufacturing at best forms a significant part of manufacturing-led organizations. But Each of these organizations need to have a very significant interface with the marketplace, with customers. And I dare say one of the banes of the manufacturing sector has been that it has not been marketing oriented and not been as marketing oriented as it needed to be, certainly in a country like India. Adopting robotics and adopting higher levels of automation starts to free up people who can then, because they know the insides of the organization well, they can go out into the marketplace and market this organization and its products and services much better, and thereby generate greater volumes of demand that would be easily fulfilled by a higher level of automation. If we had to work next to a robo, well, you must leave the robo to do what it does best. Robos can't do some things. Robos can't innovate. So that is space left for human beings. Robos are not fashion conscious. So I'm sure Zara and some of the others would not like too much of robos. And certainly, robos don't consume products, goods, and services. And therefore, for manufacturing to survive, it's essential that more and more jobs are created. And probably, India is going to show the way by creating greater demand that higher levels of automation will fulfill sometime or the other, and more accurately and in a more quality manner. So I see a great scope for both robotics and automation and higher levels of jobs and people working, coexisting and actually thriving together.
Let me give another small, in addition to what Chetan just said, is that what tends to happen is Indian economy is largely entrepreneurial led. So the investment is coming from private sector, and private sector is very conscious of the returns on investment. So it will be rarely that a mindless robotization of a manufacturing will take place, which will make the whole thing very capital intensive without adequate benefits. So like he said, it's more likely for economic reasons, not just humanitarian or, that becomes a socialist approach to looking at, what will happen to the jobs and all. My belief is it will reduce the drudgery. It will change the nature of jobs, but it will actually increase the number of jobs. It will increase the opportunity, the upskilling will happen. What is the biggest challenge we have in this country? Everybody wants to be a graduate and engineer. We are all interested in more white-collar jobs and less in a blue-collar jobs. So if the blue-collar jobs can go to more robos, and the white-collar designing a robo jobs go to the more, interested in a white-collar, I think it's a win-win situation.
Interesting. I was a few months ago in China and visited, a factory of Lear. Lear is the largest car seat manufacturer in the world. And, like many Chinese factories, this was like a mini city. So we were talking to them in the context of leadership development. And they said one big shift that is being encouraged by the Chinese government is a shift from make in China to made by China. Subtle shift, but very important one. And what that means is really moving away from China just being a contract manufacturing location for foreign companies, that is manufacturing for, let's say, Lear in Germany and exporting those seats, to being a place where innovation is happening, the higher order stuff that you guys are talking about, where innovation, where local Chinese companies are manufacturing for themselves, that is for the Chinese market and for the world, but through local IP, through local brand creation and therefore retaining the value. So Roy, if, from where you're sitting in Washington, DC, how do you see what India needs to do to not just be a place where it's make in India, where we are getting a Foxconn to come to India and manufacture iPhones for export, but really if we have to do these higher order things and create opportunities for India to retain value, what are some of the things we should be thinking about from a policy perspective?
Thank you, Vinay. I work at an independent policy think tank in the United States and direct the Washington, D.C. office of it. It's called the National Bureau of Asian Research. And some of my comments will come from a report we issued this past spring entitled Innovate in India, Global Perspectives. And there are a number of findings. I encourage you to download the report from our website. But one in particular that I think is worthy of sharing in this setting is the finding based on interaction with hundreds of stakeholders from EU member countries, Japan, the United States, and India, and including 100 confidential interviews with policymakers, industry leaders, and so forth. Numerous focused papers, including one by our own Amit Kapoor, all by Indian authors, as well as workshops in both Brussels, Tokyo, and then yesterday at Delhi University. The principal finding is that international business is ambivalent about the market environment here. Now that, on the face of it, may seem not particularly welcome or even trustworthy a statement. And we can all think of individual examples that in which companies, foreign companies, are operating here, doing well and happy. But taken over the course of that year-long effort, it's a theme that returns over and over. And we've talked about how land, labor, and tax reform are important dimensions. Another theme that emerged from our interviews and research is that the innovative environment here, as reflected in government policy relating to IP protections, is a key distractor, that it inhibits companies thinking about their futures here, and it's a negative factor as they plan for operations. Now, the Modi administration recognizes that and has taken several important steps, many of which are well known. And I think Mr. Modi effectively reached out to American business when he visited the US last year. The new IP draft policy, national policy, is a step in the right direction. Notably, a central feature of the policy talks about, in many different ways, how a mindset needs to be changed. Mm-hmm. That at an educational level, at a mobilization level, at a motivational level, that the government needs to do its best to encourage a mindset shift that values innovation and thus the IP that supports it. I think that's an important dimension to consider.
Thank you. Chetan, as a leadership development company, I can't resist asking you again at Tata Power, how are you preparing and developing your employees to be ready for this new world where they would be collaborating with robos? In the June issue of Harvard Business Review had a cover with a robo that said, "Meet your new employee," right? And there's an article there that talks about, are you ready for your new boss who wears a metal pant? So what are you doing to get your people ready for a new boss that is wearing a metal pant?
Well, we are teaching them that they can't share their lunch with their boss. That's in a lighter way. But leverage the unique capabilities that advanced robotics brings in. When I say leverage, one of our biggest issues in businesses has been our ability to respond to marketplace demand changes. And therefore, we like to predict what that demand will be. And prediction, very much like astrology, is always inaccurate. And so you have factors of safety built in, and invariably you end up filling up warehouses. A different approach would be to adapt your manufacturing system so that you meet demand on a just-in-time basis or an as-needed basis on a pull mode rather than push mode. This requires a greater engagement of the organization, of the business, with customers, with the marketplace. And that is the new skilling or the reskilling that is needed to be done. There was a time in Tata Power when the meter readers would go to each retail unit and consumption unit and read the meters. That's changed. You can now read all those meters from your control room. And that's precisely what we do. And that's freed up all of this manpower to actually do something much more value-adding and much more useful in terms of developing the market, in terms of educating customers, in terms of interacting and engaging with customers. And that has started to create a greater amount of stability in the customer base for Tata Power. And I've seen that today Tata Power deals with and supplies to over 20 lakh, that's 2 million customers between Bombay and Delhi cities put together. And this is a remarkable and silent revolution. As we did that in the Delhi city, we found that the AT&C losses started coming down because when you start educating customers, they realize that, hey, it's more honorable to buy electricity than just pick it off the wires. So there's a remarkable change and revolution which starts to happen when you leverage the capabilities of automation and robotics, and I'm sure that's going to happen in many, many other industries.
I guess on a positive note, their boss won't have bad moods or egos or go on maternity leave.
Or steal their lunch.
Or steal their lunch, yeah. So Himanshu, just over to you. We've been talking about, a lot of trends here. We've been talking about some of the policy recommendations to prepare us for them. As you think about Make in India and in the context of these trends, what do you see as one recommendation that India really needs to focus on to make things happen?
I think if you asked me, the biggest challenge India has is because of its federal structure. There is a part center, part state, and a lot of times we are not able to figure out exactly where to go for what. If there is a clarity, if there is a website which just tells you these are the 6 steps you need to take to get there, a thing as simple as this can make a huge difference. I'll give an example. In our company, our IT team was rolling out SAP across. And we were supposed to be in wave 2, and we moved to wave 4. And I had a chat with our CIO, and I said, why are you doing this? And I wanted it yesterday. He said, you have the most complex tax structure in the world. And we were scared that we are not ready. We just wanted to make sure that we get ready before we get there. And I told him, wait, why are you so bothered? SAP has a well-established tax module developed for India. They just need to plug and play. It's a perception he carried. It's a very complex. India and Brazil. Now, that's a kind of mention we can easily avoid by creating transparency, by creating what I should say, ease of understanding, explaining lucidly. And I don't think it takes a huge amount of investment by somebody, but just an effort to keep your websites updated, just a simple thing to create a simple procedure. Some state governments are doing a very good job, some are, of course, will follow. So to me, I will start with as basics, and I am a believer of do your basics right and everything else will fall in place.
And I guess that goes back to really making it about execution.
Absolutely.
Rather than just
If you
policy.
ask me, there's a huge amount of interest in investments. But many of these things, there's a lack of certainty about what is going to happen. And that is why people don't know, it happens to us all the time. Oh, one of the states increases the entry tax by 3%. Oh, does it make sense to do it there or here? And these things are like variable. It can happen any time of the year. So your models keep changing or you keep adjusting all the time.
Thank you. Vish, do you think the Make in India will have the desired impact? Are you optimistic that we are going in the right direction? And what would be one policy recommendation that you would like to make?
Well, I think this whole thing about where we are in terms of manufacturing, we are at a very interesting. Not able to hear. Am I
audible?
Audible? Okay,
Yeah.
Now it's okay.
Okay, so we are at a very interesting phase in terms of where we are, both in terms of the economic rise of India, in terms of the geopolitical context, in terms of the rising importance of the country. And also, we know for a fact that the way we can do manufacturing, we have the opportunity to redefine many things. We have the opportunity not to make the mistakes that other countries have done, whether it was the response of the US to the Japanese threat in the 70s and 80s, or it is the way China has created overcapacity in many industries, and now it's facing the consequences of that. So we have this opportunity to reorder things, number one. Number two, we also know that we cannot do manufacturing in the way that we traditionally understand manufacturing and the world understands it. We need to have a combination of high-end manufacturing, and therefore I would strongly feel that in order to make in India a success, we need to create centers of excellence in 3 or 4 core areas, driven by government funding in the Internet of Things, in robotics, which would become templates, and from where things should percolate down to industry, to MSMEs, because at the end of the day, one of the main objectives of creating a Make in India campaign is to give jobs to 400 million people. So, how does that happen? It is not necessary for everybody to be in high-end manufacturing, but we also need to compete with the world. So we need to be at the cutting edge. So we need to find a balance. And if you look across the various models that governments across the world have implemented, even in the UK, even in the US, it is the government which initially funded these, because it's the government which has the money power to do it.
Okay, thanks. I'd like to take a couple of audience questions. So before I do that, I'm just going to ask Roy, Anil and Chetan for one-line recommendations. One recommendation you'd like to make very quick on a policy front.
Make in India is a strategy crying out for improved IP protection.
Thank you.
Make in India cannot happen until we first develop India.
Make in India will succeed when we provide employment to every student who graduates out of the colleges. Make in India will succeed when you have more and more skilled people in India, ensuring that the infrastructure that will inevitably grow sustains.
Thank you. I hope you guys have been listening, because I'm not going to pretend that I can summarize all the wonderful insights that the panel has offered over the last 30 minutes. So what I'll do is, in the few minutes we have, take a few questions from the audience. Please identify yourself, keep the questions short, and in case you'd like to address it to any particular panelist, let us know.
Yeah, I would like to ask a question that maintaining conformity with quality assurance, will it be challenging when we have robotic processes, or is it really challenging with the processes with more human intervention?
Sir, your name?
Charulata.
And is there any particular panelist you have the question?
No, any.
I didn't get the question.
What was the
My question was, maintaining conformity with quality assurance, is it really challenging when we have robotic processes, or is it challenging with human intervention?
Is quality assurance easier with robo or more difficult?
I think it's to me a very simple and a direct question, which says that one of the reasons robots are in place is not just because the jobs are difficult and mundane, but they ensure consistency, whether it's bad or good. So if you program them well, you will get a more consistent output. And if they are programmed for a good quality output, it's definitely much easier to have a more automated and a more robotized factory to churn out better quality.
Next question. Yes.
Hi, my name is Ram N. Kumar. We have been talking about robo, IoT, etc., and I'm in that field. So IoT is in fact bringing change, and it is actually changing the habits and how we handle our service delivery modules. So my question is to the panel is, because IoT and everything runs based on a sensor, primarily what you call electronics. So the embedded system, so unless there is a robust backend or robust manufacturing of electronics, IoT will remain the same thing as what you had mobile. So what is your take on IoT versus Make in India and manufacturing?
Did you all catch the question?
Yeah, if you can be a bit more focused on your question.
No, my question is simple. So, because IoT is electronics-led industry basically. So, how do you connect IoT with manufacturing and Make in India? Because unless you have Make in India, it will remain import-focused industry. And in the same way, what happened to the mobile? So, what is your take on that?
can you hear me? Is that, see, IoT is an enabler, okay? It's a facilitator. And IoT is not necessarily confined to one industry. For example, the Internet of Things is used, sensors are used in cars. Sensors are used in chemical industry. So it's across the board. So IoT is an enabler. It's a facilitator, and it percolates almost every aspect of every industry. And what we are talking about is using sensors to increase the efficiency of various processes. So that would be, my answer to your question, that the Internet of Things is something which will pervade every aspect of our lives, whether it's checking fuel efficiency, or whether if you're driving in a car, ask it automatic stopping, preventing accidents, things like that. So they are enablers. Basically, they are facilitators.
No, my question was related to basically different thing. Every single sensor that you use in IoT, basically any application here are imported from China, Taiwan, or all the other countries.
So the answer there may be maybe at some point we get competitive enough to manufacture those sensors here.
No, I'll just answer that question. So at that time, the Prime Minister clearly said that India is very deficient in electronics. And they are now bringing out tremendous policy incentivizing electronics, because 80% of electronics in India are being imported. Now today you take the medical devices sector. I mean, today if somebody tells me to do an MRI on an Indian machine, I would never go into an Indian machine. I would look at a Siemens or a General Electric. So we are deficient in electronic manufacturing, and that is a great opportunity for our country, and that is where the concept of Make in India applies, that come and make in India electronic products, because India needs it. So Make in India for India and rest of the world. Does that answer your question?
Okay, so let's have one last question in case we have it.
So again, a question related to IoT. I think IoT is one particular technology. I'm a technologist. I have innovated in the IoT space long ago, before India really caught up with the word.
Could you be a little louder, please?
Yeah, my name is Dolly Bhasin. I run a small boutique consulting firm, but I have about 30 years experience in the IT area, electronics and communication engineer, gold medalist. One of the opportunities that we have today is to use IoT in our manufacturing, developing our manufacturing capability, because we have great innovators. Even 14-year boys are doing great work in the IoT space. Unfortunately, they don't get the raw material. They don't get the right sensors. They have to import the sensors, smuggle the sensors, and to really, if the manufacturing industry really wants to really get the benefit of this industry, I think there is a great need for the Indian innovators, especially the youth and the women, to be involved in the process of innovation, and especially making them have an access to some of these basic components of the IoT devices, the sensors, what he really talked about. I think that's a very, very essential need to really take down, because there's a lot of manufacturing capability that will come from very big companies, but they won't be really able to fit into the kind of environments that we really work in the manufacturing capability. Just to give you a background, I mean, I did one of the first ERP in the country.
Cut you in the interest of time. Is there a question? Because I think
this question is basically addressed that what are we doing to really encourage the IoT sensors and the components that really go into the manufacturing, the electronics that go into the manufacturing, to be imported at a low cost, so that people can innovate and really work around solutions towards the manufacturing sector.
Sure. Is there anything being done? I mean, there's clearly general policy initiatives. Anything specifically that the panel is aware is being done to make sensors accessible at low cost today?
At least I'm not aware of anything specific being done about it. But like any industry, you start using it, you will initially import it, and then there'll be one of the entrepreneurs sitting in the room will spot an opportunity, he'll invest in making the sensors. That's how the things have developed. I remember 25 years back when I started in the industry, the proximity switches were imported. Today there are maybe a few hundred people who manufacture them, and a very good quality, no problem, the cost has come down. So I think in an Indian economy, if we compare it to China, which is a command and a control economy, is erroneous. You know, the way we start looking at China did it, how are we doing it? We will never be able to follow China because we are a democracy, we are not a control economy. So we'll create market situations and people will adapt, and you know, the entrepreneurship will take over.
Thank you.
I don't think there's an direct incentive there today.
Thank you. Thank you for all the good questions and the wonderful insights. I'm going to hand it back to
Thank you so much, Vinay.
Thank you.
I'll just make one just quick little thing for your benefit. On the 1st of October at the Shangri-La Hotel from 10:30 to 1:30, there's a very interesting program. It is titled as In Conversation with Amitabh Kant and, Mr. Amitabh Kant and Mr. Ajay Shankar for Ease of Doing Business. Because as you know, Mr. Amitabh Kant is the secretary, DIPP. He is driving the Make in India program. And Mr. Ajay Shankar was the ex-secretary DIPP, who has now been mandated by the Prime Minister's office to make this entire document of ease of doing business based on which the World Bank ranks. But then, of course, there are 5 or 6 more, chapters added to whatever the benchmarks of the World Bank are. And there'll be an intense conversation between these two bureaucrats and 6, 7 large industrial houses. And fortunately, the US Embassy is also participating in it. And naturally, their ambassador cannot come because of our Prime Minister being there. So they're sending a senior level representative, knowing that Secretary Kant and Secretary Shankarji will be on the dais. So, and that time, also an entire document containing 14 chapters with over 1,500 suggestions against each point on ease of doing business, that it will also be launched by the 2 bureaucrats. So that was just for your information,
Thank you so much.
will get a hardcore knowledge there.
Thank you so much.